But I have been more unequal than others in the field of writing books, in the field of historians. I started writing books in 1963. My very first book was a bestseller. I've written 30 books since then. In fact, last night I had a dream that I was on a ski lift. This is true. Rising up through the mountains and beneath me were the titles of all my books. And I can see ahead the 3 books that were going to come, I suppose, before I die. The 3rd volume of my church revival. The 3rd volume of my church revival. And how many of you know that I've written volumes 1 and volume 2? A hymn Bible, the Bible of Heinrich Hitler, the mass murderer who brought about the Holocaust. The interesting question: what did he know? What did he tell Adolf Hitler? Who was responsible? These questions which I researched in depth for the last 10 or 15 years. The book will probably never be published because I am more unequal than the other historians because of the networking of the people who paid for the demonstrators outside, who paid for the coaches to bring them here across the country. The coaches cost money. Who put up the money for these coaches to bring the demonstrators here to Oxford today to try and stop us speaking? Ask ourselves these questions. And again, we have brave people in this country. I'd like to mention Michael Howard, who was Home Secretary in this country at the time the question of Holocaust denial laws were raised in Europe. And the 13 then ministers of the interior in Europe all voted in favour except for one, and that was Michael Howard. He said England is a free country and historians and writers must be allowed to research and write and publish what they find to be true without fear of the law. Let us be proud of that. A year ago, 2 years ago, 2005, I was on a motorway in Austria, having been unable to address the University of Austria students in Vienna on a very interesting subject. The subject was in fact the negotiations between Adolf Eichmann and Earl Graf, and the British, and role of the British code breakers, who were following these extraordinarily interesting negotiations between Adolf Eichmann, the mass murderer, and Earl Graf, the leader of the Jewish community in Budapest, and we British intelligence were following what they were doing through the code breakers. Very interesting subject. I was not allowed to speak to that student body. I had to turn and flee. I drove south towards Italy to try and get out of Austria on time because Austria is a dictatorship again. Very similar to the Nazis in this times now. Similar kind of wars. Within 2 hours, my car was forced off the motorway, and 8 policemen jumped out and held their 9mm Glock automatics to my head, and I spent the next 400 days in solitary confinement in the prison in Vienna, which is where I lived from there to here today. When you're in solitary confinement 24 hours a day, you don't get the exercise over the muscles for long. And I still refuse to be bound and not going to write what they want me to write. I will write what I find in the archives, and I will try and publish what I find in the archives, and my enemies will continue to try and stop me. Not because it's a Jewish idea, it isn't with respect to the previous speaker, whose talk I greatly admire. I found myself agreeing almost everything he said. It isn't a Jewish matter. What people don't like about what I write about history is what concerns me as an Englishman. I was born in 1938 into a great world empire. We saw that empire frittered away in a useless war, and I am convinced as a historian from the records that I've read in Germany and in Britain that Britain was never at risk. We could have gone out of the war cheaply in 1940, we could have accepted it as dangerous as many members of the family wanted to, and there would have been no Holocaust, because it happened after 1940. The selfish British politicians decided to fight on, and the records show it quite clearly. The records of the German naval staff, the naval high command, the records of the British Public Record Office in Kew show this beyond peradventure. I've got the right to publish that. I published it in my Hitler biography, Hitler's War. I published it in the Churchill biography, and people don't like this because they don't like being told that World War II was a journey we shouldn't have taken. World War II, the first part of the war said, is your journey really necessary? We were bankrupt on the 5th of December 1940 because we were fighting a war that damaged only Britain and benefited only the United States. And this was a very, very great shame, because I personally am proud of what we British did around the world with the empire that we built over this 11 years. I've been directed by the President to bring out the last fact of most of the speech. The point I'm making is that I am prevented from publishing these facts, which are so unpalatable to the English now, because it doesn't suit certain groups of people. Not the Jews, it's not to do with them, it's the establishment of this country. And the establishment has had it in for me for the last 4 decades. Go to my record office, you see the records that are now coming out on Thursday and how they tried to have the arrested and prosecuted and put in prison in this country. Freedom of speech is too important not to protect. But as a previous speaker said, it must be hemmed in with certain conditions and certain allowances. You mustn't confuse liberty with license. Liberty with license. Liberty is important. That's what has to be protected. Liberty for people like me to tell you things which aren't palatable. Freedom of speech means the right to be wrong sometimes. Because when you see other people being wrong, then you realize what is right. And if you prevent other people from making mistakes or propagating views that may be wrong and even unpalatable to you, then you cannot satisfy yourself about what is right. John Stuart Mill is so much better than I do. And we have to have the right, of course, within that liberty to pursue people who use that liberty deliberately to smear. Journalists, what I call Schmierfinger, using the German word. The Schmierfinger, I find it so easy to say, they were over the Holocaust denial. But they stopped saying it again now. They observe last week's like the Holocaust revisionists. Okay, the Holocaust revisionists. You don't have to buy the whole package. You're entitled to go to the package sometime. You have that to buy it, and you must be free to read it and make up your own mind. The freedom to make up your own mind is as important as the right for us to be able to speak freely. And people outside will prevent us from being free. I wish I could invite them in so that they too could join in and come back and meet with their counter-arguments. Because their minds are closed. They try. They can't debate, they can't argue. Every time they found prevented from entering the country, university growing, countries around the world and in Australia, I can't even visit my own children and grandchildren in Australia. I can't visit Canada, I can't visit Germany, I can't go to Austria now. Every time that happens, I regard it as a victory. It's a victory because it's proof that country doesn't have something capable of debating with me, somebody who's done the same research as I had, somebody who's shaken the hands of all the members of the little church and staff, done the primary research the way that I have. That is for the same thing because I done the work that they have. I must be free to publish and print, research and write and distribute the truth as I find it.